Truck drivers. What's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Story 1. Not sure if this story is creepy, but it is definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 1980s and early 1990s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently, he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe, and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he was not Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night they would take about 5 people from the cage and kill them in front of him. After the third night, he saw a man who spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my father also spoke, and told him that he was not Rwandan, then showed him his identification card. Somehow that man got him out, and he was handed the keys to his truck and allowed to leave. Story 2. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were these massive dirt areas every 40 miles where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night, closed my blinds, and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I heard someone try to open the driver's side door. I had not heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I was parked, but I got up to peek out the curtains. As I looked out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I heard them try the passenger side door. I peeked down from the top of the curtain but could not see anything, so I started the truck and turned on the lights. I was fairly freaked out at this point, so I still did not open the curtains, only peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody was standing near either of my doors or parked within sight. I took a deep breath and closed the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason I thought that would make things better. After laying back down and convincing myself that maybe something blew against the truck and only sounded like the doors, I then heard what sounded like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles started clicking again, and the truck started shifting like someone was climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper, hoping to spook them off, but it did nothing except add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on the windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly it stopped. A few moments passed where I could only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I heard another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I could not find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and pressed it to the glass over and over. Story 3. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, where he saw a woman with a bun hairstyle, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knew how to react, the car pulled off at the next exit, and my dad, although shaken, carried on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulled alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same terrified expression on her face. My dad thought to himself that even if it was nothing or a misunderstanding, it would be better to be safe than sorry, so he planned to pull into the next services to report it. However, the car disappeared before he could get any details, like license plates, and he thought there was no point in calling the police without them, so he carried on driving. Nearly 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulled alongside him with the same woman, same hairstyle, same terrified expression, except this time she appeared to be screaming at him through the window. My dad pulled over into a lay-by and called the police. Apparently, they had received 3 other calls about the same woman and car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it. He did not see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, there was nothing reported. Hopefully, it was just a strange coincidence. Story 4. Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears by to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late at night on a 2-lane road through the Everglades and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for several miles. She fell asleep, and he was looking for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough, so he gave it a listen. The host came on and said something like, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you are driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally would not even think about it, but for some reason he felt compelled that night. He woke up his girlfriend, who was annoyed and did not want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for about 10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he had ever seen. They got back on the road and drove another few minutes, then came across a massive accident. The truck they had been following had jackknifed and taken out several vehicles that were behind it. He said there were multiple fatalities, but I have never been able to find a news story about it to confirm. It probably would have been around 2005. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random host on the only radio station that came in that night. Story 5. Around 2006, I was driving flatbed and picked up a load of construction material, drywall or roofing. I do not remember exactly, but it was pre-packaged in boxes, and I had to use strap protectors on the load. This was in rural Tennessee, somewhere between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee state lines. The load required a tarp, so I strapped everything down, tarped it, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. I found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized I had done a terrible job tarping the load and decided to redo it right there on the side of the road. I undid all the bungee straps, dragged the tarps off, rolled them up, climbed onto the load, and started unrolling the tarps again. That is when I saw a man walking down the same side of the road toward my truck. At first, I did not think much of it except to keep an eye on him since I was in the middle of nowhere, and I continued what I was doing. By the time I had the tarp set in place and was climbing down to start hooking the straps, the man was close enough that I was paying more attention to him than to the tarp. I grabbed my winch bar, a solid 8-pound metal bar about 4 feet long, with a blunt point on one end and a hollow on the other, and set it on the trailer just in case. The first thing I noticed was his hair. It looked like a mullet but patchy, as if he had tried to cut it himself and given up halfway through. His eyes were the next thing. They were clear, so I did not think he was drunk or high, but they seemed off, like something was not right. His clothes were dirty, his white tennis shoes were worn, one shoe missing laces with the tongue hanging out of place. He stopped by me, waited until I acknowledged him, and simply said, "I have a long walk." I responded, "Yeah, you do. We are in the middle of nowhere," making it clear he was not getting a ride. He nodded, kept walking, stopped at my driver's door, turned around, came back to me and repeated, "I have a long walk." I explained I could not give him a ride due to insurance rules and apologized. He seemed to accept that, turned, and walked away. I waited for him to get a little farther before resuming my tarp job. As I finished, I looked up to check on him, and he had turned back. Now about 100 yards in front of my truck, he was coming toward me again, appearing to talk on a cell phone. He had his hand to his face, mouth moving, his other hand waving like he was having a conversation. I grabbed my winch bar, climbed into my truck, locked the doors, and set the bar on the passenger seat. As he got within 10 yards, I realized he was not holding a phone. He was talking to his hand. It did not look like a friendly chat either, more like an angry argument. I cranked the truck, put it in gear, and pulled out without even checking for traffic. As I passed him, he just stared at me, hand pressed to his face, eyes locked on me with a dead, unsettling look. It gave me chills. By the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I looked in the mirror and he was gone. Story 6. Not technically a truck driver, but I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, which meant I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience has always stuck with me. I was in either northeast British Columbia or northwest Alberta, I cannot remember exactly, driving late at night when I noticed a very large black shape on the road ahead. Thinking it was a moose, I hit the brakes and stopped only a few feet away. Despite my headlights shining directly on it, I still could not tell what I was looking at. It had the vague outline of a 4-legged animal, but it was massive, probably about 6 feet tall. Aside from that, it was completely featureless. No details, no reflection from eyes, nothing. Then I noticed there were more of them in the ditches on both sides of the road. 5 or 6, maybe more, identical black shapes. None of them moved. They did not look like animals or even solid objects, more like patches of absolute darkness. Dread set in, and I drove around the one blocking the road and sped off. I do not believe this was a paranormal experience. I had been driving for over 8 hours straight in the middle of the night and was exhausted. Most likely it was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep and staring into the dark for too long. Still, it was an unsettling moment I have never forgotten. Story 7. Not a truck driver, but I have spent the past 4 years driving every day and night for work. I was in a fairly rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. It was all two-lane highway for the 250-mile drive home. The weather had turned rough as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife and told her there were high wind advisories and possible tornado threats throughout the Delta, and I would call her as soon as I reached a safe area again. I had already been working for 14 hours before I got in the truck, so I ate dinner and grabbed some coffee to stay awake. If you have never driven through flat farmland at night for 100 miles, it is already fatiguing and spooky without severe weather here. I had gone about 30 miles into the farmland when hail started bouncing off my truck. Being a Mississippi native, I knew that in July, hail meant a tornado was likely. I pulled to the side of the road, completely alone, no lights, no cars in front or behind me, and started scanning for a storm. I rolled down the passenger window and shined a bright flashlight into the night. Nothing. I turned to the driver's side, and that is when I saw a man's face pressed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. I screamed and he was gone. I slammed the truck into drive and took off. Our trucks have cameras running at all times. When I reached the first safe place to stop, I called my wife. I did not want to scare her, so I never mentioned the hailstorm or the man at my window. I did, however, pull the SD card to check the cameras. I swear that man never appeared on the front or rear cameras. I have always told myself it was my imagination, but I do not drive through the Delta in the dark anymore unless I absolutely have to. Story 8. I am a trucker, and I think the creepiest thing that ever happened to me was while I was heading from Tucson, Arizona, up into Salt Lake City, Utah. This was a few years ago, and the main highway had been washed out in a flash flood and was under construction, so I had to take a strange detour through the mountains in lower Utah. It was getting late, and I was tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. This was in the middle of nowhere, with the closest town about 40 miles away, so once I turned off the lights, it was pitch black. Around 4 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of something messing with my truck, like it was tugging at the air and power cables between the cab and trailer, which were only a few inches from where my head was. Then I felt something heavy climb onto the landing on the back of my truck, shaking the whole rig. It had to be at least 200 to 300 pounds, so I thought it was a mountain lion or maybe a bear. At that point, I was wide awake and wanted it gone, so I slammed my hand hard against the cab wall to scare it off. Suddenly, I heard a man scream in terror, and then the sound of him falling off the truck. Immediately after, I heard about 15 more people yelling all around me. I jumped into the driver's seat, turned on the lights, and saw a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. It turned out they were supposed to secure an abandoned truck 3 miles back down the road. They had not expected to find me sleeping there and assumed I was part of their exercise. I am ex-military, so after explaining I was just a coincidence, not part of their drill, we all laughed it off. They had to radio their commanding officer to tell him I was legitimately there and to make sure no other squads disturbed me. Story 9. I have seen some disturbing things over the years. Bad wrecks, people strung out, panhandlers, and more. There used to be a small rest area in North Dakota on US 52 at the intersection of North Dakota 30 near Sikeston. I came out of the building after using the facilities and got ready to leave. As I was starting to pull out, a man opened his car door. The angle was just right for me to see that he was completely unclothed. Then he stepped out of his car and started walking around it. I was not sure if he was on something or just thought, this is a good way to get a truck driver's attention. I drove away and never looked back. Maybe that is not creepy in the traditional sense, but it was for me. Another story that unsettled me happened when I was driving across Kansas on Interstate 70 headed west. There is a long stretch out there with only a few small towns and not much else. As the night wore on, I realized I had been passed several times by this beat-up old motorhome. Each time, several people inside sat with their faces almost pressed to the windows, staring at me with unsettling interest. What bothered me was that I never saw where I passed them again. A couple of times, I swear they managed to pass me twice in places with no rest areas or exits. I should have seen them pulled over somewhere. But no, they just kept reappearing. They all looked like strange, wild-eyed types, and it had me on edge by the time I reached the TA truck stop in Lyman and called it a night. And honestly, almost every driver I know has seen things late at night that are hard to explain. Maybe it is just fatigue, or maybe not. I have seen huge man-like shadows cross the road too quickly for their size more than once. I am not saying it was Bigfoot. I never got a clear view. It was always at the edge of my headlights, where I could not be entirely sure of what I was seeing, but it sure looked like something massive crossing the entire road in just a couple of steps. Storytime. As a crew member for an off-road racing team in Baja California, Mexico, I sometimes got to test drive rigs and trucks, so technically that made me a truck driver. One night, my buddy and I were driving south along the Sea of Cortez on a 4-hour dirt road to Gonzaga, which is basically the middle of nowhere in the desert. We saw headlights from a car coming up fast behind us. Tailgating. The driver had roof-mounted bar lights, which are extremely bright, and he was blasting them straight at us. That was not unusual out there. Locals and tourists would get drunk in the nearby spring break town and then tear down that road at high speed since there were no police around. I tried waving him off, hoping he would lower the lights, but he would not. He did not slow down or dim them, and it was a dangerous pitch-black road. Finally, near a curve along the shore, I found a spot where I could bail off the road safely. We pulled over and watched as his lights shot past us at full speed, heading straight for the curve. We thought for sure he was going to crash into the sea, but instead of plunging off the road, the lights kept going, straight across the sand, onto the beach, and into the water. Then, unbelievably, they pitched upward into the night sky and vanished. My buddy and I sat in silence for a full minute before he finally asked, "Did you see it?" I replied, "The flying truck." After that, we did not talk about it again. It just did not make sense to even try. Story 11. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains and Minnesota area. One night around 2 in the morning, I was hauling across North Dakota, trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed the next day. I began to feel some highway hypnosis creeping in, but it did not worry me since I had experienced it many times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows how incredibly flat it is, with long, straight roads that let you see far into the distance, even at night. I noticed something stretched across the road about half a mile ahead, spanning my entire lane. I slowed down and prepared to move into the opposite lane, assuming it was a blown tire or road debris. But as I got closer, I realized it was two people lying head to toe across the lane. I swerved into the other lane, avoided them, and came to an almost complete stop. Yet they did not move at all. I was about to back up and check when I remembered a story an old veteran driver once told me. In remote areas, people sometimes lie down in the road to lure a vehicle to stop. Then others hidden nearby jump out, attack the driver, and steal the truck, leaving him stranded. With that in mind, I decided not to go back. When the two people saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they stood up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police to report it, but we were so far from civilization that I doubt much came of it. Thanks to that old driver's advice, I kept my truck, my job, and my teeth. Story 12. Not a truck driver, but once I was driving through the Canadian Rockies late at night, just past a small town. It was pitch black, and I needed to stop to use the bathroom and have a smoke. I missed the last rest stop, but since the highway was deserted, I pulled over. I relieved myself while staring into the darkness, then lit a cigarette and stood by my car. As I stood there, I saw the figure of a man walking out of the tree line. I was miles from civilization, with patchy cell service, and no one else on the road. At first, I thought it might be a deer, but no, it was a man. Calmly, I walked back to the driver's door, got in, locked the doors, and kept my eyes on him. My car was in drive, ready to take off, but for some reason I stayed. The man walked up to my passenger door and knocked. I cracked the window and asked what was wrong. In a very serious tone, he said, "I need you to call the police." I cautiously asked why, and he explained he had gone into the woods planning to end his life, but stopped at the last moment after thinking about his daughters. I called the police while he quietly cried outside. He had a kitchen knife with him, so I gently suggested he leave it on the ground before they arrived. When the officers came, they took him into their care. Before they left, I spoke with him for a moment, told him I wished him well, and encouraged him to hold on. I still think about him sometimes, hoping he found a way to turn his life around. Story 13. I was parked off an exit ramp at about 3 in the morning for my 10-hour break. The moon was full and bright, and I spotted what looked unmistakably like a human figure standing in a nearby cut cornfield. It gave me a little chill, but I brushed it off as maybe some farmer setting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. I started watching a few videos before turning in, and out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement. I shut my lights off to get a better look. The figure was still there, but something felt different. It looked like it might have shifted positions, maybe even closer. By now, I was definitely spooked. The highway was empty except for the occasional car passing every 10 minutes. I didn't want to, but I needed to get out to pee. I thought about just using a bottle, but told myself I was being childish. I glanced at the figure again, and it was right where I thought it should be. I hopped out, walked between my truck and trailer, and started going. But every nerve in my body screamed at me to look. I told myself not to, but I did. The field was empty. The figure was gone. My stomach dropped. I stopped midstream, jumped back in the cab, and took off down the highway. I did not care about any violation. 40 minutes later, I pulled into a well-lit, packed Love's and stayed there for the night. I have not parked on a ramp since. Story 14. I am not a truck driver, but I drive 5 hours one way for work. My shift ends at 11:30 at night, so if I catch a second wind, I can make the full trip home. If not, I stop to nap. One night I was getting tired just before reaching Binghamton, about an hour and a half into the drive. There is an exit with a gas station I use often about 15 minutes before town, so I pulled in. I fueled up, grabbed snacks and smokes, and put my usual sign in the window. I'm okay. I just have 4 more hours of driving to do. Please don't knock. I started doing that after people kept calling the cops on me when I slept too hard, thinking I was unresponsive. I set an alarm for 20 minutes, pushed back my seat, and closed my eyes. This was around 1 in the morning. The next thing I knew, it was 6:30 in the morning, and I was on some back road with fields and houses, crawling along slowly in my car. I had no idea where I was or how I got there. My phone barely had service, but I managed to plug in my mom's address, and navigation took me to a highway entrance in Harpersville, New York. In about 20 minutes, I was back on track. To make it worse, I had once gotten into an accident from falling asleep at the wheel. Totaled my car, got a scar on my eyebrow, nosebleeds, back problems, and a nasty fight with insurance. But I survived. But this terrified me more. If I woke up to my alarm, that would have been 1:30 in the morning. I did not come to until 6:30. That is 5 hours of unaccounted for time. What was I doing? How did I not hit anything? The car was perfectly fine, no damage. How was I apparently driving at the right speed since no cops pulled me over? Was I asleep the entire time? Sleep driving until I finally woke up? I still do not know. The fear from that night carried me the rest of the way home. Story 15. Years ago, I was driving with my ex-girlfriend back from a wedding in northern Wisconsin, heading toward Madison where she lived. We were maybe 20 or 30 miles from the city, and it was around 1 in the morning. My GPS, which was some cheap brand from Radio Shack that my dad had given me, sent me onto backcountry highways after I stopped for gas, instead of putting me back on the expressway right away. I did not mind much. I always found those roads peaceful, even if they were creepy at night. My girlfriend had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, so I turned the music down low so I would not wake her. That silence made the atmosphere even more eerie. I was focused on the dark, empty road when something on the shoulder caught my eye. It was a massive mountain lion, and its face looked like it was smeared with blood. My heart jumped, and I shook my girlfriend awake to see it, but by the time she opened her eyes, it was gone. I pulled to the side of the road, telling her to watch the mirrors so she could see it cross, but it never did. She was convinced I had imagined the whole thing, pointing out that mountain lions are not common in that part of Wisconsin. But I know what I saw, and it was real. Story 16. I was on a cross-country road trip driving through the middle of nowhere in Kansas when one of my tires blew out. I pulled over to call for help, but there was no service, so I started trying to change the tire myself. Before long, a police officer pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said yes, and he replied, "You're in luck. I know the best tow truck driver." He made a call, and soon a tow truck arrived. The officer left, and the driver asked where I wanted to go. I said, "Just to town, somewhere I can get this fixed." He said, "Well, you're in luck. I know the guy at the only place open right now." He towed me a few miles into what looked like a ghost town, if you could even call it that. The place was completely empty except for the gas station connected to the repair shop. While my car was being worked on, the tow driver and mechanic sat around talking for hours. Finally, they came out with the bill, $1,200 for a single tire repair and a 5-mile tow on a 1991 Grand Am that was not even worth that much. I had no choice but to pay, but then they told me it was cash only. The driver smirked and said, "You're in luck. There's an ATM next door at the gas station my buddy owns." I went in, took out the maximum cash on several cards with $20 fees each, and when I turned around, I saw the cop, the tow driver, the mechanic, and the gas station clerk all together, eating chips and laughing. Looking back, I am convinced I was set up. The cop had arrived way too fast for the middle of nowhere, and my other 3 tires were all fairly new. I got scammed hard and left covered in mosquito bites, needing cortisone cream, and short on cash for the rest of my trip. Story 17. It was around midnight, and 3 of my friends were helping me move a heavy toolbox into a storage unit before I relocated to Texas. Afterward, I offered to take them to Waffle House as thanks, since it was one of the only places open that late. We left around 2 in the morning, driving through Chickamauga Battlefield in Georgia to get there. The place is eerie even in daylight, but at night it is downright terrifying. 2 of my friends did not know the local ghost stories, so my buddy and I decided to mess with them. We told them about phantom figures on the roadside, glowing green eyes of a ghostly panther, cars rolling uphill, and apparitions in rearview mirrors. We even drove to an old bridge with the legend that if you stop and turn your car off, it will not start again. We tried it, sat for a moment, started the car, and nothing happened. Just harmless fun. But a little farther on, we came around a corner and saw something that froze all of us. In the ditch, illuminated directly by the headlights, stood a black mass, taller and wider than a man. It did not move, did not reflect light, and had no shape other than being a huge, solid darkness. All 4 of us screamed, and I floored it, nearly sliding off the road trying to get away. To this day, none of us can explain what we saw, but we all agree it was not natural. Story 18. This is a story my grandfather used to tell. In his youth, he worked as a lumberjack in rural Washington and Oregon. Most of his stories were uneventful, but there was one night he never forgot. He and 3 others were driving home late after work. He and another man in the back seat had dozed off, while the passenger in front kept the driver company to help him stay alert. Suddenly, the car screeched to a halt, waking the 2 in the back. Both the driver and passenger were pale-faced, swearing as they stared ahead. In the headlights stood something enormous, tall, wide, and dark, blocking the road. All 4 of them got a good look before the driver spun the car in the fastest 3-point turn my grandfather had ever seen and took another route. They later agreed it could have been a bear startled by the car, trying to defend itself. But whatever it was, it terrified them enough to keep telling the story for years. My grandfather repeated it at every family gathering, and it is etched into my memory because of how serious he always seemed when he told it. Story 19. I used to do deliveries. Not really trucking, but long drives nonetheless. One of my regular customers lived way out in the boondocks, about 25 miles from civilization, smack between 2 larger towns. I drove that route maybe once a month, and because of how long it was, I would usually see at least 1 car going the opposite direction. Along the way, there was a cluster of old broken-down houses. I had never once seen anyone around them in over 6 months, so I assumed they were abandoned. They looked unlivable. One fall afternoon, I was on that route again, and after what felt like forever without passing a single car, I finally approached the houses. This time, there was an old woman in the front yard pushing a manual grass cutter. As I drove closer, she suddenly stopped in her tracks, as if frozen, and watched me approach. I thought maybe I was speeding, so I eased off the gas. After I passed, I glanced into the rearview mirror. She was staring straight at me. Then she dropped the mower and turned fully to face me, her eyes locked on the truck. The whole thing sent shivers down my spine. I never saw her again, or anyone else near those houses, in the 10 months I continued driving that route. Story 20. The strangest thing happened during my last week at a major carrier before I switched to local driving. The company had a strict no-passenger policy, but a friend of mine who wanted to become a driver begged to ride along, so I broke the rule and let her. We left my home, heading toward Illinois. I had driven that route dozens of times and knew exactly where I usually stopped for the night. My truck was governed at 62 miles per hour, and by the time I approached my planned rest stop, I was nearly out of my 11-hour drive time. But when I checked my Qualcomm, it said I still had an hour and a half left. That made no sense. I was driving west to east, it was late August, and there was no daylight savings. I figured maybe I could push closer to my destination, so I kept going. An hour later, it still claimed I had a full hour left. I was exhausted and my friend tried to do the math. Departure times, breaks, everything, but none of it lined up. Finally, I gave up and pulled into the next truck stop to sleep. The thing is, I had been on the road for 13 hours, yet the system showed only 11. The rest of that week was just as strange. Two cars spun out directly in front of me, wrecking into everything but my truck, and then a semi stalled in front of me on a mountain pass. It felt like one bizarre event after another. My friend was so shaken by the whole experience that she decided not to pursue trucking at all. She went into medicine instead. Story 21. My friends and I were road tripping from Arizona to California, leaving around midnight so we could arrive before sunrise. 3 hours in, I needed gas, and we also wanted to get rid of the weed we had before the return trip. So we stopped at a dimly lit gas station. We rolled a joint, but before we could smoke it, a man ran up to my driver's side window and started pounding on it. I rolled it down just a crack, enough to talk but not enough for him to reach inside. He looked sweaty and anxious, scanning the inside of my car like he was searching for something. At first I thought he was an undercover cop, and my heart sank. But he said his car had broken down and asked if we could take a look at it. This was 3 in the morning. None of us knew anything about cars, and I had not even pumped gas yet. I told him I could call a tow truck, but he insisted on using my phone. My nerves spiked and the other girls were panicking. I spotted a payphone by the vending machines and offered to pass him some quarters through the window. His demeanor changed instantly. He grew calm, stared me dead in the eye and said, "Unlock the door." My eyes flicked to where his car was parked and I saw 2 other men pacing outside it while a third sat in the driver's seat. Every alarm in my body went off. I snapped, "No!" rolled up the window and sped off. I reported it to the police, but I never heard anything back. To this day, I am convinced that if we had stepped out of that car, we never would have been seen again. Arizona is a hot spot for trafficking, and that night was a close call. Be safe out there. Story 22. I'm not exactly a trucker, but I work as a commercial delivery driver in a rural part of the Midwest. One day as I was leaving our home store, the radio inside suddenly stopped working. Everyone thought nothing of it and just turned it off. I got into my work vehicle, started it, and realized my radio was also dead. But this was not just one station. It was every single station. I thought it was strange and went back inside to ask if it was the same there. Sure enough, their radio was also nothing but static. I checked my personal car, same thing. I called my fiance and best friend, who were across the county in non-rural areas, and their radios were also out. I even called my mom, and she had no signal either. Everyone at work started calling nearby stores and customers, and none of them had radio service. It was like a complete blackout. I eventually left for my deliveries, leaving the radio on low, even though it was just static. Then out of nowhere, I heard faint voices coming through, cutting in and out. It was a language I could not recognize, spoken in what sounded like a computerized female voice. My co-workers later told me their store radio picked it up too. After that, nothing but static for a few more hours, until slowly, one by one, the stations came back. The strangest part was that no one ever mentioned it. No news, no announcements, no explanation from any station. It was as if it never happened. That silence about the whole thing is what unsettled me the most. Story 23. I am not a truck driver either, but I sometimes accompanied my stepfather on his routes. One time we were driving down a long, curvy road surrounded only by trees. No houses, no fences, nothing but endless forest. After a while, I noticed a man walking ahead of us. He wore dirty white rubber boots, a striped light blue button-up shirt, a blue cap, a cloth bag slung over his right shoulder, and a machete hanging from his dusty jeans. I can still picture him clearly. As we drove closer, the man seemed to stay the same distance away, no matter how much ground we covered. I told my stepdad we should offer him a ride since we were far from any town. He looked over and asked, "Who?" "There's no one here but us." I pointed, insisting the man was right there, but my stepdad could not see him. This went on for a few minutes until suddenly the man vanished. I convinced myself I was imagining things, but then spots of blood began appearing on the road. I stayed quiet, telling myself it must have been from an injured animal. The trail did not end. Later, when I asked to stop for a bathroom break, the man appeared again, but this time he was coming from the opposite direction. I muttered to myself, "Not you again." I tried to ignore it, but as I finished, I saw him running straight toward me, getting closer and closer. Terrified, I scrambled back into the truck and begged my stepdad to drive. He laughed, saying I was crazy because he still saw no one. The blood trail finally ended after a few more kilometers. I tried to forget about it, until much later, when my mom told me about seeing the same man and the same blood trail on a different road. It may not sound as scary as other stories, but the memory still haunts me and makes me question what I saw. Story 24. A friend of mine's husband is an over-the-road driver, and he told me a story last year. In California, he decided to stop for the night in a diner parking lot. There was not much else around, but he thought a hot coffee would be nice. He got out of his truck and walked inside, where he was greeted by a beautiful woman named Jackie. She welcomed him, sat him down, and asked if he wanted pancakes and coffee. He told her he was not hungry, so she frowned, then returned with coffee and a slice of homemade pie, telling him he needed to eat. It turned out to be the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. Jackie sat with him and talked for about an hour. He realized there was something special about her. When an Elvis song came on, he asked her to dance. They shared a couple of slow dances before she handed him a rose. He thanked her, and she asked him to come back before leaving in the morning for a hot breakfast. He nodded and went back to his sleeper. He woke to pounding on his window and saw a sheriff outside. The sheriff asked if he was doing all right. They started talking, and the driver explained he was about to head in to say goodbye to Jackie, mentioning how much he had enjoyed her company. The sheriff stared at him, confused, then said, "Jackie died 3 years ago." He pointed to the diner, which was run down and abandoned. The driver, stunned, opened his truck door and pulled out the rose Jackie had given him, still sitting on the passenger seat. The sheriff stepped back and said Jackie was known for putting fresh roses on the tables. She had been killed during a robbery when 3 men broke into the diner late one night. The driver had no idea until then. Story 25. I am a truck driver now, and this happened about a year ago. It was not paranormal, just a terrifying case of sleep paralysis, but it shook me badly. I was on my way to Arizona on Interstate 10 and had just run out of drive time, so I stopped at a truck stop on the California-Arizona border in Blythe, California. I parked under a street lamp, went into the sleeper, closed the curtains, and watched some videos on my phone before falling asleep. The next thing I knew, I woke up and everything seemed normal. I could see a thin line of light through the curtains. Then I heard someone jingling keys and unlocking my truck. I felt the weight of someone sitting in the driver's seat, even hearing the air hiss as the seat adjusted. Alarmed, I tried to move but realized I could not. I tried to shout but could not make a sound. I heard the person start the truck. The radio crackled to life, and the familiar monotone voice of the Weather Channel it always defaulted to. Then I felt the truck moving, pulling forward in a wide arc to clear the parked rigs nearby. My panic spiked as I fought to move, but I was completely stuck. Suddenly, I snapped out of it, regained control, and bolted upright. I ripped open the curtains and there was no one. The truck was still in the same spot, locked with the engine off. The same trucks were still parked around me. Nothing had changed. I told myself maybe I had heard another truck, but it was clear it had only been in my mind. I concluded it was sleep paralysis, but it was the most vivid episode I had ever experienced. The accuracy of the details, the keys, the seat hissing, the specific crackle of the radio was terrifying. Being alone in a truck in the middle of nowhere made it even worse. It reminded me how powerful and unsettling the mind can be when it blurs the line between dreams and reality. Story 26. A friend of mine drove a rig for a few years and told me about one late-night trip through Utah on a quiet two-lane highway. He said he was unusually alert that night and noticed something forming in the darkness just off the road. Curious, he stopped, grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, and shined it toward the figure. What he described still creeps me out. It was a humanoid creature crouched over a dead coyote, eating it. The light caught its attention, and it slowly rose to its full height, about 6 feet 2. It had gaunt, bony limbs, unnaturally large eyes, and its face was smeared with blood from the coyote. With no weapon other than the flashlight, which was only helping him see the creature, he panicked as it began to shuffle toward him. He jumped back in the cab and floored it. As he sped away, he glanced in the mirror and saw it standing in the middle of the road on two legs watching him. When he reached the next rest stop, he found two other truckers talking outside. Both looked horrified, and when he spoke to them, they admitted they had seen the same thing. My friend swears he knows what he saw was not human, and knowing his honesty, I believe he truly encountered something strange that night. Story 27. Back in the 1980s and 90s, I worked in music as part of the sound and setup crew. That meant a lot of late-night drives in the equipment truck through isolated back roads after shows. One night, around 2 in the morning, a friend and I were crossing a swampy stretch of two-lane highway when we spotted a car off the road in the trees. Its headlights lit the woods and its taillights glowed red. At first, we drove past, but then we realized it might have been an accident. Reluctantly, we turned around to check, though I was dreading what we might find. We parked and I forced myself to walk into the trees. The car door was hanging open, the key alarm chiming. Ding, ding, ding. The headlights still glared, but there was no one inside. No blood, no broken glass, no sign of an accident. Just a car sitting abandoned in the woods. The only explanation I could think of was a drunk driver who ran off the road and then wandered away. Still, that night has stuck with me. The scene felt eerie, and I often wonder what really happened there. Story 28. Years ago, I was driving south on a freeway in Utah. It was broad daylight, yet I had not seen another vehicle for miles. Finally, I spotted a semi ahead in the right lane of the two-lane freeway. I moved left to pass, slightly over the speed limit, while the semi was going slightly under. The stretch I was on crossed some kind of bridge or culvert, so there was no shoulder to escape to. As I reached the midpoint of the semi, it suddenly began drifting into my lane. There was nothing in front of him, no curves, no reason at all to change lanes, and nowhere for me to go. I thought I was about to die. Time seemed to slow and I floored the gas. My car shot forward just in time. When I looked in the mirror, the semi was fully in my lane, right where I had been. To this day, I am convinced it was deliberate. The day was clear, my bright red car was impossible to miss, and he had seen me coming from far away on that long, empty straightaway. If I had reacted a split second too late, it would have looked like just another tragic highway accident. Instead, I lived, and I have never forgotten how close I came to not making it. Story 29. Back when my dad was a freight train driver, he once had to stop at a red signal in a wooded area, far from anywhere. The guard, who usually rode at the back of the train, radioed to tell him it would be a while. My dad stepped off to relieve himself near the bushes. While doing so, he noticed a fairly well-dressed man approaching. The man asked for a lift to the nearest station. He carried a backpack and, oddly, an axe. My dad agreed, letting him ride in the cabin. For the entire 2-hour trip to the next station, the man never put down his backpack or axe. He just sat there, watching my dad with a strange, manic expression. It was not the look of some lumberjack getting off work at 2 in the morning. After dropping him off, my dad and the guard reported the encounter to the police. A month later, the department issued a warning not to pick up strangers. That man was identified as a gang member who had recently shot someone and dismembered the body in that same area. Story 30. My dad knew many truckers who drove routes in Mexico where theft and danger were common. One of his friends told him about a trip from Sonora to Colima. He had stopped for snacks before entering the mountain passes, planning to finish his run and then start his vacation. As he got back in his truck, a young woman asked for a ride to her family home just up the road. He agreed and drove her about an hour, eventually dropping her off at a large hacienda. She thanked him, kissed him, and told him she would be waiting for him when he returned. She also warned him to be careful on the dangerous mountain trails. He hugged her, kissed her back, and went on his way. After safely delivering his load, he returned the same route in daylight and stopped at the hacienda, hoping to see her again. When he asked about her, an old man asked for a description, then grew sad. He told him that the young woman had been his daughter. She had died years earlier when her bus went off the mountain road. The trucker remembered how cold her kiss had felt, but had assumed it was the air. After 17 years of driving, he retired and settled in Texas, never forgetting that encounter. Story 31. I was running through California one night on the State Route 58 near Tehachapi. I was getting tired, so I pulled over to nap. Since my load had been rescheduled, I decided to stay until closer to my usual nighttime drive. I was just starting to learn astrophotography, and where I parked seemed perfect. Dark, quiet, and empty. I climbed onto my trailer above the reefer unit, set up, and began adjusting settings. Suddenly, I heard movement in the brush below. I felt safe. After all, nothing could climb 13 feet up to reach me. I shined my flashlight but saw nothing. I assumed it was the wind. A few minutes later, I heard it again, farther along the trailer. Again, nothing when I looked. The sound was heavy, more like a person than a small animal. I reassured myself because my passenger door was locked, and I had a clear view of the driver's side. Then 5 minutes later, I heard a voice say, "Hey." My heart nearly stopped. I jumped to my feet, flashlight scanning everywhere. But there was no one. Silence. I stood frozen, trying not to breathe too loud. Then I heard my trailer door handle unlatch. I had no load, but whoever was there didn't open it. They just unlocked it, as if to draw me to the back. Snapping out of my panic, I leapt down to the catwalk, hit the ground, and scrambled into the cab. I locked the doors, started the truck, and tore out of there. After 5 minutes, I pulled over to close and lock the trailer door. My hands were shaking so badly it was hard to latch it. I never stopped on Tehachapi again after that, and I gave up on astrophotography entirely. Whatever was out there that night, I never want to find out. Story 32. My grandpa was in the Teamsters Union for more than 30 years, driving routes across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. He was an excellent trucker with only one minor accident in all that time. That accident happened late in his career when he was on Highway 55 in New Jersey, a stretch of road that locals know is dangerous, and also infamous because many Native American artifacts were unearthed during its construction and repairs. Grandpa was about 30 minutes from home, driving in the dark, when suddenly 3 to 5 human-shaped silhouettes bolted across the road in front of him. Startled, he swerved left, scraping his cab and trailer against the guardrail, while the figures made it across to the right side. He hit the brakes and looked in his mirror, catching a glimpse of the last figure disappearing into the trees. The whole thing lasted only seconds, but he sat there for 10 minutes afterward, replaying it over and over in his head. He never got a clear look at them, but he said they appeared to carry what looked like canes, and their clothing was ragged, more like animal hides or rough cloth. As a city boy from Philadelphia, he only ever thought of Native people as the ones shown in old Western films, not as figures darting through the woods of southern Jersey. But looking back, he realized the canes could have been spears or bows. He was shaken when he got home and at first kept it to himself, sharing only with his trucking buddies. Eventually, one of them told him he should tell his wife about what happened. Story 33. My dad often tells the story of when he went backpacking alone with his dog in Northern California in the late 1970s, along the Pacific Crest Trail. He had parked his car by the highway and hiked about 7 miles in when the afternoon started fading. He was looking for a good spot to camp when his dog, Mika, suddenly started to growl low, her hackles raised. She was an experienced trail dog, not easily spooked, so he thought it might be a bear nearby. He looked around but saw nothing. Then he noticed she was staring and pointing her nose toward a spot just up the trail. He walked forward to check, and there he found a footprint. It was massive, far larger than any human could make, pressed deeply into the earth, with what looked like claw punctures at the front. He stood frozen, staring at it in disbelief, trying to figure out how it could possibly be there. He thought maybe it was some prank, but he had not seen another soul on the trail, and it was in such a remote spot that it made no sense for someone to create a hoax there. Meanwhile, his dog remained on edge, pacing and whimpering. A wave of dread washed over him, and he decided not to stay. As he turned back, he swore he heard movement in the trees, something heavy, like a large animal following him. He and Micah practically ran the entire 7 miles back, despite the weight of his pack. Once in the car, he sped off without looking back. To this day, he says it was one of the most terrifying experiences of his life, and he has never been able to explain what he saw. Story 34. A few years ago, I visited a friend in rural Maharashtra, north of Nagpur. He was from the area and wanted to show me the places where he grew up. One evening, he suggested we drive about 50 kilometers to a village that he swore had the best food in the region. We left around sundown, and as night fell, we came upon a cluster of abandoned structures at what looked like an intersection. Even though it was September and the air was warm and humid, the temperature around us suddenly dropped so sharply that I could see my breath. A crushing feeling of dread came over me, as if something malicious surrounded us. I tried to stay quiet, thinking it was just nerves from being somewhere new. But then my friend whispered, "This is a bad place, an evil place. I cannot explain it, but I think many have died here." His words nearly made me jump out of my seat. As we reached the intersection, we had to maneuver around a cart sitting in the road. As we did, I felt what I swear were ice-cold fingers brushing through the closed window, and the steering wheel jerked violently. We scraped the side of the cart, and my friend instinctively stopped. That was when things turned horrifying. Ahead of us, a group of villagers dressed in pure white appeared, hovering over the road rather than standing on it. Their eyes glowed like the eerie red-eye effect in old photographs. Immediately, I began to cry as a flood of sadness, terror, and anger washed over me. My friend threw the SUV into reverse, spun around, and we fled the area without another word. We never made it to the village he had wanted to take me to. Later, when we finally spoke of it, he said, "The ground in India is old. It holds thousands of years of memories, and you can never know what happened in a place. I never want to know what had happened there. To me, it was as close to hell as I ever want to come." Story 35. My uncle used to drive trucks from Northern Europe to Iraq in the 1980s, when the Saddam regime was modernizing the country and spending massive amounts of money on imported equipment and foreign expertise. To get there, drivers had to go through Turkey since the Soviet Union was not an option, but the Turkish route was incredibly dangerous. At the time, Turkey was facing economic collapse, and millions of people were homeless, jobless, and desperate. Along some roads, entire tent cities and shanty towns sprang up, filled with people hoping to scrape by. But many turned to banditry. Foreign trucks were prime targets. The bandits would stop trucks, kill the drivers, and swarm the vehicles like ants on prey. Contractors instructed drivers never to stop for obstacles in the road, ram through anything, because stopping meant almost certain death. In response, bandits became even more ruthless, sometimes shoving children into the road to force drivers to stop. Even then, drivers were ordered to keep going, no matter what was in the way. Corrupt police made things worse. Officers would stop foreign drivers and rob them at gunpoint, or lure them to secluded spots to kill them and take their trucks. Others would arrest drivers on fake charges and demand huge ransoms for release. Companies told their drivers to never stop for police either, even if it meant ramming police cars. My uncle admitted he rammed through road obstacles several times, but he would never say whether any of those obstacles were human. He carried that silence for the rest of his life. It was clear the experience scarred him deeply. Looking back, I am sure he carried a kind of unspoken trauma from those years on the Turkish roads. Story 36. I am an over-the-road truck driver in America, usually sticking to the Midwest because I like the open roads and less traveled highways. I prefer driving at night. There's less traffic, fewer construction zones, and it just feels calmer. On this particular night, I was headed from Kansas to Wyoming. I drive long stretches without stopping, so I always stock up on food and drinks before I start. Over the years, I've trained myself to hold it until I absolutely can't anymore. By the time I was in Nebraska, the urge to pee finally hit me. I started looking for a safe spot on the roadside where I could pull over without risking my tires. It took a while, but I eventually found a place that seemed decent enough. It was pitch black out there, in the middle of nowhere, so I decided I wasn't stepping outside. Instead, I grabbed an empty gallon jug from my cab. While I was doing my business, I heard a tap. At first, I thought it was just my mini fridge making noise. Sometimes when it defrosts, water drips and makes a tapping sound. I checked, but it wasn't that. The sound was more like a small rock hitting the driver's side of my truck. I leaned forward, looked out the window. Nothing. I checked all the other windows. Still nothing. I started wondering if it was just the truck itself making noises. I was about to get out and look under the hood when another rock hit the driver's door. This time I looked toward the field right next to me. Corn. Tall corn stalks swaying in the night breeze. Now, if you've ever been near cornfields, you know the stalks grow tall. 8 feet tall, sometimes taller. I stood on the top step of my cab and could just see over them. That's when I noticed it. The top of someone's head. Just the hair. Black hair, barely visible above the stalks. Whoever it was had to be massive. My stomach dropped. I ducked back inside the cab, locked the doors, cracked the window a little, and shouted, "Hey, you need help?" Silence. I tried again. "Hey, man, you good?" Still nothing. That was it for me. I fired up the truck, threw it into gear, and took off, pushing it as fast as I could to get away. I didn't dare look back. Hours later, I finally made it to a truck stop in Wyoming. I went inside to grab some food, and when I came back out, I saw scratches down the passenger side of my cab. They looked like someone had keyed it. My anger spiked, and I scanned the lot, but I couldn't spot who did it. Most drivers weren't even in their seats. As I inspected further, I saw more marks near the back of the cab, close to the platform where it connects with the trailer. That's when my mind flashed back to the figure in the cornfield. I never felt anyone climb on, never heard a thing. But those marks weren't there before. Nothing else happened after that, thankfully. But to this day, I still don't know who that person was, why they were there, or what they wanted. And honestly, I'm glad I never found out. Story 37. This happened years ago when I was technically driving a pickup, not a semi, but it still shakes me to think about. I was working IT for a big 3-letter tech company, doing late-night retail system upgrades. One night, around 1 or 2 in the morning, they needed an extra hand on a site about 70 miles away. I was a broke teenager who liked overtime pay, so I went. I was on an unfamiliar 2-lane highway, no streetlights, no traffic. As I rounded a bend, I noticed traffic cones haphazardly blocking off the left lane. No warning signs, no work crews, just cones. About a quarter mile down, a car was stopped dead in the right lane. I slowed nearly to a stop, clueless about what was happening, when 2 men suddenly stepped out of the car and started walking toward me. My stomach dropped. I floored it, ran over a cone, and swerved around them. One guy tried to jump in front of me, but I dodged him and took off. The cones ended right where the stopped car had been. A few miles later, once the adrenaline hit me, I called the cops to report it. While I was on the phone with dispatch, headlights appeared behind me. My heart started racing. I was sure I was being followed. I pulled off at the next exit with a gas station, and the car followed. Panicked, I bolted inside the store, only to realize it was a completely different car. A small woman got out to pump her gas, not the 2 men from the road. When I caught my breath, I asked her if she'd seen a stopped car after the cones. She said she had noticed cones, but there hadn't been any car when she passed. About 15 minutes later, a cop showed up to take my statement. He mentioned they'd had a similar report a couple of weeks before. I never heard anything more, but I'll never forget the feeling that night, like I'd narrowly avoided something terrible.